The cancer gave Elijah Carter 3 weeks to live. Charles Palmer had kept him behind bars for 8 years, buried under fabricated evidence and bought testimony. A perfect frame job that sent an innocent firefighter to prison for murder. But Palmer's watching the news now, hands shaking as his empire crumbles, because a witness just walked into that courtroom. A man with proof that could expose decades of corruption, destroying everything the Palmer family built through 3 generations of bribes and bloodshed, and it all started with a child's request. "Please let me hug my daddy one last time." 8-year-old Nia Carter's plea ignited a firestorm that's about to burn through every dark secret in the city. As Palmer scrambles to silence witnesses, a dying man's clock is ticking. But he's not just fighting for his freedom anymore. He's fighting to stay alive long enough to hold his daughter. Sometimes the deadliest threat isn't the one you're watching for. Sometimes it's the innocent wish of a child that brings down an empire built on lies, and Charles Palmer is about to learn why. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The harsh fluorescent lights of the prison infirmary cast long shadows across Elijah Carter's gaunt face as another violent cough racked his body. His cellmate Darnell Williams leaned forward in his plastic chair, concern etched deep in his weathered features. "Easy now, brother. Easy," Darnell murmured, offering Elijah a paper cup of water. "You gotta take it slow." Elijah's hands trembled. As he accepted the cup, his once strong firefighter's grip now weak and uncertain. The water barely soothed his raw throat, but he managed a grateful nod to his friend of 7 years. "You know," Darnell said, trying to keep his voice light, "in all my time here, you're the only man who's made me believe in real innocence." A ghost of a smile crossed Elijah's pale lips. "Lot of good that belief does me now." His words dissolved into another coughing fit, this one bringing spots of red to his handkerchief. Dr. Sarah Maxwell entered the infirmary, her footsteps echoing against the sterile walls. She'd reviewed Elijah's test results dozens of times, hoping to find something she'd missed. But the truth remained unchanged. Aggressive lung cancer, spread too far, too fast. In her 15 years as a prison doctor, she'd delivered bad news countless times. But something about Elijah Carter's case felt different. "Mr. Carter," she began, her professional tone masking her sympathy. "The latest scans show significant progression. The cancer has spread to your lymph nodes and liver, without immediate aggressive treatment." "How long?" Elijah's voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Maxwell's clipboard lowered slightly. "Weeks. Maybe a month if we're fortunate." Elijah closed his eyes, his hand instinctively reaching for the folded paper he always kept in his breast pocket. The edges were worn soft from countless openings, the creases deep from years of being folded and unfolded. A child's drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands, one tall, wearing a firefighter's helmet, the other small with pigtails. Above them, in wobbly, kindergarten letters, "Me and Daddy." His daughter Nia had sent it 3 years ago when she was 5. They'd never actually held hands like in the drawing. The closest they'd come was pressing their palms against the cold glass of the prison visiting room, trying to imagine what real touch would feel like. In his mind, he traveled back 8 years, to his last day of freedom. The courtroom had been packed, tension thick in the air. His wife Monica's sobs echoed off the walls as the bailiff led him away in handcuffs. Baby, Nia, not even a year old, wailing in her mother's arms, as if she somehow knew her world was shattering. The sound of those cuffs clicking shut had ended one life and begun another. One measured in 15-minute visits behind glass and carefully worded letters that tried to explain to a growing girl why her daddy couldn't come home. Miles away, in a modest apartment on the east side of town, 8-year-old Nia Carter stood on her tiptoes, carefully marking another day off the prison visitation schedule magnetized to the fridge. Her mother Monica watched from the kitchen doorway, heart aching at how normal this ritual had become for her daughter. "3 more days until we see Daddy," Nia announced, her voice bright with anticipation. She turned to her mother, dark eyes serious. "I'm going to tell him about getting an A on my science project, the one about firefighters." Monica's throat tightened. That's wonderful, baby. He'll be so proud. Jimmy Wallace said his dad told him my daddy's a bad man, Nia continued, her chin lifting defiantly. I told him he's wrong. My daddy's a hero. He used to save people. Monica crossed the kitchen and pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. You're right, baby. Your daddy's not a bad man. Don't you ever let anyone tell you different. Is that why you kept all his firefighter medals? Nia asked, glancing at the box high on the shelf in the living room. Because heroes get medals? Monica nodded, fighting back tears. That's right. And one day, when all this is over, he'll tell you the story behind each one. In a downtown law office, Jordan Hayes rubbed his tired eyes, surrounded by stacks of legal documents. The lights of the city twinkled outside his window as night settled over the skyline. His computer screen displayed yet another rejection of his motion for compassionate release. 8 years of fighting this case, and the system remained as cold and unyielding as ever. But something about this last medical report, about Elijah's rapidly declining condition, had given him a new angle. He began drafting another motion, this one different from the others, not asking for release but for something simpler and yet somehow more profound, a chance for a dying man to hug his daughter one last time. He worked through the night, crafting the language carefully. Your Honor, we are not asking for Mr. Carter's release. We are asking for a basic human dignity, the chance for a dying father to embrace his child once before he passes. In all the years of his incarceration, Mr. Carter has never once held his daughter. She was an infant when he was imprisoned. Now, as he faces his final days, we ask the court to grant them this one moment of connection. The initial response from Judge William Thompson was predictably negative. Mr. Hayes, while I sympathize with your client's condition, the security risks of allowing physical contact between an inmate and a civilian are simply too great. The precedent it would set. With all due respect, Your Honor, Jordan interrupted, his voice firm. We're not setting a precedent. We're asking for basic humanity. When the judge remained unmoved, Jordan knew he had to change tactics. He leaked the story to local media, knowing the public's appetite for emotional human interest stories. Within days, social media was ablaze with the hashtag, "Let Elijah hug his daughter." Local news stations picked up the story, featuring interviews with medical experts about the importance of physical contact for both dying patients and their children. The pressure grew until Judge Thompson had no choice but to revisit the motion. He finally agreed to a supervised meeting in his courtroom, though his ruling came with strict conditions and security requirements. The news of this small victory reached far beyond the courthouse. In a luxurious office across town, Charles Palmer set down his phone, his face tight with concern. He turned to the window, looking out over the city he'd helped build, often through means best left in the shadows. Get me everything on this hearing, he ordered into his intercom, and find out who's covering it in the press. I want to know every reporter, every angle, every detail. His secretary's voice crackled back. Sir, social media is picking up the far story fast. It's trending locally. Palmer's jaw clenched. Get me Detective Graves, now. Across town, in a small cluttered apartment, Detective Martin Graves poured himself another drink, his hands shaking slightly as he watched the evening news coverage of Elijah's story. The reporter's words barely registered. All he could see was the photo they kept showing of Elijah in his firefighter uniform, standing proud and straight, a man who dedicated his life to saving others. His phone buzzed with a text from Palmer. Watch this case, closely. Graves drained his glass, the familiar burn of whiskey doing nothing to ease the acid in his stomach. He knew what Palmer really meant. Make sure the past stays buried. But how do you bury something that's already clawing its way to the surface? He opened his laptop, accessing old case files. Evidence logs, witness statements, the carefully constructed web of lies that had sent an innocent man to prison. His cursor hovered over the delete button, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was 8 years of guilt, but he found himself instead hitting print. Back in his cell, Elijah held his daughter's drawing to the dim light filtering through the high window. His body felt lighter somehow, knowing he'd see Nia soon. Really see her. Not through glass. But with that joy came fear. Not of dying. He'd made his peace with that. No, he feared what could happen if the truth came out during this hearing. The same people who'd buried him in here wouldn't hesitate to make sure his daughter and Monica paid the price for any revelations. "You really think they'll let you hug her?" Darnell asked from the bottom bunk, his voice soft in the darkness. "They have to," Elijah whispered back. "I've got nothing left to lose but everything to give her." The night settled over the prison like a heavy blanket, but sleep eluded Elijah. In the darkness, memories of flames and betrayal danced behind his closed eyes, while hopes of one last embrace with his daughter kept his heart beating against all odds. In the Palmer building downtown, Charles Palmer sat in his dark office, phone pressed to his ear. "Make sure our friends in the media understand the sensitivity of this situation. We don't need anyone digging too deep into old cases." "And if they do?" the voice on the other end asked. "Then remind them how their mortgages get paid." Palmer's voice was cold. "This story needs to stay focused on the dying father angle, nothing else." Detective Graves sat in his living room, surrounded by printed case files, each page a reminder of the lies he'd helped build. His phone buzzed again. Palmer, demanding updates. He ignored it, instead picking up a photo of Elijah with his firefighting unit. They were all smiling, arms around each other's shoulders, brothers in all but blood. How had it come to this? In her bedroom across town, Nia sat at her small desk, carefully drawing another picture for her father. This one showed them in a garden, holding hands under a bright sun. No glass walls, no prison uniforms, just a father and daughter together. She added a heart in the corner and wrote, "I love you, Daddy," in her best handwriting. Monica watched from the doorway, her heart breaking all over again. "Time for bed, sweetheart." "Just one more minute," Nia pleaded. "I want to make it perfect for Daddy." "It already is perfect," Monica assured her, moving to kiss the top of her head. "Just like you." As Nia climbed into bed, she clutched her stuffed Dalmatian, a gift from her father before everything changed. "Mom, when I hug Daddy, do you think he'll feel different than I imagined?" Monica sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing her daughter's hair. "I think he'll feel exactly like what he is, your father who loves you more than anything in this world." In his cell, Elijah fought against another coughing fit, trying not to wake Darnell. His chest burned, each breath a struggle, but he refused to give in. Not yet. Not when he was so close to holding his daughter. Dr. Maxwell's words echoed in his mind. Weeks, maybe a month. Time was running out, but for the first time in 8 years, Elijah felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Not hope for himself, but hope that somehow, through whatever was about to unfold, the truth would finally find its way into the light. His last thought before exhaustion finally claimed him was of Nia's smile in the visiting room, pressed against the glass, her small hand aligned with his larger one. Soon, that glass would be gone. Soon, they would touch. And maybe, just maybe, that touch would be enough to set things right, even if he wouldn't be around to see it. The night grew deeper, and somewhere in the city, the pieces of a puzzle 8 years in the making began to shift. All because a dying man dared to ask for one simple thing, the chance to hug his daughter one last time. In the quietest hours before dawn, as the city slept, 4 people lay awake, each haunted by their own thoughts. Elijah, clutching his daughter's drawing like a lifeline. Nia, dreaming of her father's embrace. Detective Graves, surrounded by the evidence of his sins. And Charles Palmer, plotting to keep his carefully constructed world from crumbling. The truth, like a seed planted in darkness, was beginning to sprout, reaching for the light. And soon, a simple request for a father's embrace would shake the foundations of power and expose the lies that had destroyed an innocent man's life. 8 years ago, the courthouse buzzed with tension as Elijah Carter stood before Judge Thompson, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the crisp suits of the prosecution team. His hands, calloused from years of gripping fire hoses and carrying victims to safety, were now bound by cold metal handcuffs. District Attorney Robert Wilson paced before the jury, his voice dripping with practiced indignation. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you'll hear today is the story of a man consumed by bitterness, a firefighter who betrayed everything his uniform stood for. Elijah's heart pounded as he watched the faces of the jurors. Some avoided his gaze, others stared with open hostility. In the gallery, his pregnant wife Monica sat clutching her swollen belly, their unborn daughter kicking beneath her hands as if sensing the gravity of the moment. The evidence will show, Wilson continued, that on the night of March 15th, Elijah Carter deliberately set fire to the Palmer Industries warehouse, resulting in the death of fellow firefighter Leon Palmer. Not just any firefighter, but the brother of Charles Palmer, one of our city's most respected businessmen. The prosecution's case unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Photo after photo flashed across the screen. The charred remains of the warehouse, close-ups of gasoline traces, and most damaging of all, security camera stills showing a figure that could have been Elijah near the building that night. Your Honor, Wilson announced, I call Mrs. Sarah Palmer, widow of Leon Palmer, to the stand. Sarah Palmer approached the witness box, dressed in elegant black, her grief perfectly presented for the jury. Her hands trembled as she dabbed at key, her eyes with a tissue. Mrs. Palmer, Wilson began softly. Please tell the court about your husband's last interaction with the defendant. Sarah's voice quavered. 2 weeks before the fire, I heard them arguing outside the firehouse. Elijah was screaming at Leon, saying he'd regret crossing him, that he'd make him pay. She pointed a shaking finger at Elijah. Those were his exact words. You'll pay for this. Elijah gripped the defense table, his knuckles white. The argument, she described, had never happened. Leon had been his friend, his brother in the department. They'd saved lives together, trusted each other with their very breath in burning buildings. His court-appointed defense attorney, Mark Stevens, barely looked up from his papers. The man had spent less than an hour preparing for this case, treating it like just another number in his overwhelming caseload. Mrs. Palmer, Stevens asked during cross-examination, his questions half-hearted at best. Are you certain about the date of this alleged argument? Objection, badgering the witness. Wilson called out. Sustained, Judge Thompson ruled without hesitation. Stevens sat down, not even attempting to challenge Sarah's testimony further. Elijah felt his chances of justice slipping away with each passing moment. In the back of the courtroom, Charles Palmer sat watching the proceedings with calculated interest. His presence alone seemed to cast a shadow over the proceedings. Even the bailiff stood straighter when he entered the room. Outside the courthouse during a recess, Detective Martin Graves met Charles Palmer in the parking garage, away from prying eyes. Their voices echoed off the concrete walls. Everything's taken care of, Graves reported, passing Palmer a manila envelope. The security footage from the gas station across the street, the one that would have shown Carter was nowhere near the warehouse that night, has been permanently lost. Palmer nodded, sliding the envelope into his briefcase. And the witness who saw someone else that night? Convinced him his memory might be playing tricks on him, Graves replied, avoiding Palmer's eyes. Amazing how clear things become when someone's facing their own legal troubles. Back in the courtroom, the prosecution called a parade of witnesses. Each testimony seemed to add another nail to Elijah's coffin, each story more damning than the last. Fire investigator James Roberts took the stand, pointing to diagrams and chemical analysis reports. The fire's point of origin shows clear signs of accelerant use. The burn patterns are consistent with an experienced firefighter's knowledge of how to cause maximum damage. And in your expert opinion, Wilson pressed, could this have been an accidental fire? Absolutely not, Roberts declared. This was intentionally set by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. From his seat, Elijah watched his fellow firefighters in the gallery. Men and women he'd worked alongside for years now sat silent, their faces masks of uncertainty. Only Thomas Baker, his oldest friend in the department, met his eyes with a look of doubt. During another recess, Thomas approached Elijah's defense table. Something's not right about all this, Elijah. The evidence they're presenting, it doesn't Match what I saw that night. Before Elijah could respond, a hand clamped down on Thomas's shoulder. Chief Michael Harrison, his face stern, pulled him away. Back off, Baker. Don't make this worse than it already is. The trial continued, each day bringing new revelations that seemed carefully crafted to destroy Elijah's reputation. Wilson painted a picture of a man driven by jealousy over Leon Palmer's recent promotion, a man who'd lost his moral compass. My defendant, Wilson proclaimed, had applied for the same position as Leon Palmer 3 times. 3 times he was passed over. The last rejection came just days before the fire. What Wilson didn't mention was that Elijah had withdrawn his application weeks before, having recommended Leon for the position himself. That documentation had mysteriously vanished from the department's files. In the gallery, Monica watched helplessly as her husband's life was systematically dismantled. She remembered the night of the fire, how Elijah had been home with her, rubbing her aching feet and talking about names for their baby girl. But their alibi was dismissed as spousal bias, not even worth presenting to the jury. During a lunch break, Charles Palmer cornered Stevens in the courthouse bathroom. No words were exchanged, just a thick envelope passed between them. Stevens left with his shoulders hunched, avoiding his own reflection in the mirror. When court resumed, Stevens barely put up a defense. His cross-examinations were weak, his objections half-hearted. He didn't call a single character witness, despite Elijah's years of decorated service and the lives he'd saved. "Your Honor," Stevens announced prematurely, "the defense rests." Elijah stood up, desperate. "What about our witnesses, the people who can testify where I really was that night?" "Sit down, Mr. Carter," Judge Thompson ordered sharply. The closing arguments were a study in contrasts. Wilson wove a compelling narrative of betrayal and revenge, his words painting Elijah as a monster in hero's clothing. "Think about Leon Palmer's family," Wilson implored the jury. "Think about his widow, who will never feel her husband's embrace again. Think about his brother Charles, who lost not just a sibling, but a testament to their family's dedication to this city." Stevens's closing argument lasted barely 5 minutes, a rambling mess that seemed designed to fail. "While the prosecution's evidence might seem convincing, I ask you to consider all possibilities." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, a shockingly short time for a case involving the death penalty. Elijah's heart sank when he saw their faces as they filed back in. He knew before the foreman spoke. "On the charge of first-degree arson, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty." The words fell like hammer blows in the silent courtroom. Monica's sob pierced the air, and baby Nia, sensing her mother's distress, began to wail. The sound of his daughter's cries would haunt Elijah's dreams for years to come. Judge Thompson's voice was cold as he delivered the sentence. "Elijah Carter, this court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." As the bailiffs led him away, Elijah caught one last glimpse of his wife cradling their daughter, of Charles Palmer's satisfied smirk, of his fellow firefighters looking away in shame. The doors closed behind him, sealing him into a nightmare that would last 8 long years. That night, in his temporary cell awaiting transfer, Elijah lay on his bunk, trying to make sense of how thoroughly his life had been destroyed. Down the hall, he could hear other inmates shouting, but all he could think about was Monica and their baby girl. Meanwhile, in an upscale restaurant across town, Charles Palmer raised a glass with Detective Graves. "To justice served," Palmer said, his smile never reaching his eyes. Graves took a long swallow of whiskey, trying to drown the image of Elijah's face as the verdict was read. "What about Baker? He seemed ready to make trouble." "Leave Thomas Baker to me," Palmer assured him. "Everyone has their price, or their pressure point." The next morning, Thomas Baker arrived at the firehouse to find his locker cleaned out. Chief Harrison delivered the news personally: early retirement, effective immediately, with a generous pension package. The message was clear: stay quiet, stay comfortable. In the Palmer Industries boardroom, Charles Palmer met with his attorneys. "Make sure all the trial documents are properly archived," he instructed. We wouldn't want anything to get misplaced. And the real evidence? One lawyer asked carefully. What real evidence? Palmer replied, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. Detective Graves sat at his desk, methodically removing certain photos from the case file, replacing key documents with altered versions. Each piece of paper felt heavy with the weight of his betrayal, but the money in his offshore account helped ease his conscience. Sarah Palmer, alone in her luxurious home, stared at a photo of Leon. "I did what you asked, Charles," she whispered. "God forgive me. I did what you asked." The truth of that night, of how Leon had discovered his brother's insurance fraud scheme, of how he had threatened to expose it all, of how Charles had arranged the fire to silence him and frame an innocent man, remained buried beneath layers of fabricated evidence and bought testimony. 8 years later, in his prison cell, Elijah woke from the nightmare of that trial, his body drenched in cold sweat. The memory of those days still had the power to shake him to his core. Darnell's voice came from the darkness. "That trial dream again?" "Yeah," Elijah whispered. "But something's different this time. With this hearing coming up, with Nia being allowed to be close to me, I can't help feeling like maybe the truth has a chance." "Truth's like water, brother," Darnell replied softly. "No matter how many rocks they pile on top, it always finds a way to flow." In her apartment, Monica sat looking through old newspaper clippings from the trial, her fingers tracing the headlines that had condemned her husband. A text message lit up her phone, an unknown number. "Keep your daughter away from the courthouse. Some truths are better left buried." She deleted the message, her hands shaking, but her resolve firm. 8 years of silence had protected no one. Maybe it was time for the truth to finally break free. Across town, Jordan Hayes sat in his office, poring over the trial transcripts. Something about Sarah Palmer's testimony nagged at him. The dates she mentioned, the specific details, they seemed too perfect, too rehearsed. He began making notes, connecting dots that had been deliberately scattered 8 years ago. And in his mansion, Charles Palmer paced his study, phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what it takes," he growled. "This hearing cannot be allowed to open old wounds. Do you understand?" The wheels of justice had ground an innocent man to dust 8 years ago. But now, as Elijah Carter prepared to hold his daughter for the first time, those same wheels were beginning to turn again, this time perhaps in the direction of truth. Dawn broke over the city courthouse, its marble steps already crowded with reporters and camera crews. The morning air hummed with anticipation as security personnel established barricades to control the growing crowd. Inside, Judge Thompson stood at his chamber window, watching the scene unfold below. Monica helped Nia smooth down her yellow dress for the 10th time, her daughter's favorite color chosen specially for this moment. They sat in the courthouse, waiting area, Nia clutching her latest drawing, another picture of herself with her father, this one showing them in a garden full of flowers. "Remember what we talked about, baby," Monica said softly, adjusting the ribbon in Nia's hair. "Daddy might look different than the pictures you're used to. He's been very sick." Nia nodded solemnly. "But his heart's the same, right, Mom? That's what matters." Monica swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "That's exactly right, sweetheart." Down in the courthouse basement holding area, Elijah sat on a metal bench, his prison jumpsuit hanging loose on his gaunt frame. A guard helped him put on the tie Jordan had brought. Department protocol required inmates to be properly dressed for court appearances. Elijah's hands trembled too much to manage the knot himself. "Never thought I'd wear a tie again," Elijah murmured, his voice rough from another morning of coughing. The guard, Officer Mike Sullivan, stepped back to check his work. He'd been watching over Elijah for 8 years, seen the way he carried himself, how he helped other inmates, never causing trouble. "You're a good man, Carter. Whatever happened back then, well, just focus on your girl today." Jordan Hayes arrived early, carrying a thick briefcase. He'd spent the night reviewing old trial documents, something about Sarah Palmer's testimony still nagging at him. But today wasn't about the past. It was about giving a dying man the chance to hold his daughter. The courtroom filled quickly. Local media occupied the front rows, their cameras ready to capture what everyone expected to be a touching human interest story. Nobody suspected this simple moment would unravel 8 years of carefully constructed lies. Charles Palmer sat in the back row, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the wooden benches. His phone buzzed constantly with updates from his network of informants. Detective Graves sat 3 rows ahead, his collar tight against his neck, a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the room's cool air. At precisely 9 a.m., the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge William Thompson presiding." Judge Thompson took his seat, his face stern. "Before we proceed, let me make one thing clear. This is not a hearing to review Mr. Carter's conviction. This is purely a humanitarian consideration. Any attempt to turn this into something else will result in immediate termination of these proceedings." Jordan stood. "Understood, Your Honor. We're simply here so a dying father can hug his daughter one last time." The judge nodded to the bailiff. "Bring in the prisoner." The side door opened, and Elijah entered, shuffling slightly, his chains clinking with each step. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even those who'd expected him to look unwell were shocked by his appearance. 8 years of imprisonment and disease had carved deep hollows in his cheeks, turned his once strong frame fragile. Monica's hand tightened around Nia's as her daughter took in her father's appearance for the first time, without glass between them. But Nia showed no fear, no hesitation. Her eyes remained fixed on Elijah's face, seeing past the ravages of time and illness to the father she'd always known was there. "The court will now allow the approved contact between Mr. Carter and his daughter," Judge Thompson announced. "Officers, please remove the defendant's restraints." 2 guards approached Elijah, methodically removing his handcuffs and ankle chains. The metal clanked against itself, the sound echoing in the hushed courtroom. Elijah rubbed his wrists, looking smaller somehow without the restraints that had defined his existence for so long. "Nia Carter," the judge called, his voice softening slightly. "You may approach your father." Nia stood, smoothing her yellow dress one last time. She looked up at Monica, who gave her an encouraging nod. The little girl took a deep breath and stepped into the aisle. The distance between the gallery and where Elijah stood seemed enormous to her small legs. Each step echoed on the polished floor as she walked toward the father she'd only known through glass and letters. The entire courtroom held its breath, cameras clicking softly, capturing each moment. Elijah sank to one knee, his body trembling with the effort to stay upright, his arms opening to his daughter. Tears streamed freely down his face as he watched. His little girl approach, no longer the infant he'd last held, but a beautiful, brave child who'd grown up without him. "Daddy," Nia whispered as she reached him, her voice carrying in the silent courtroom. "My baby girl," Elijah choked out, his arms wrapping around her as she threw herself into his embrace. The moment their bodies connected, 8 years of separation shattered. Elijah pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her small body against his chest. Nia's arms wrapped around his neck, holding on as if afraid he might disappear again. "I knew you weren't bad, Daddy," she whispered against his shoulder. "I always knew." Elijah's body shook with silent sobs as he held his daughter, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped protectively around her small frame. "I love you so much, baby girl. So much." In the gallery, Monica pressed her hand to her mouth, tears flowing freely as she watched father and daughter finally embrace. Around her, even hardened reporters dabbed at their eyes, their cameras temporarily forgotten. "I made this for you," Nia said, pulling back slightly to show Elijah her drawing. "See, it's us in a garden. Because gardens are pretty in sad places, shouldn't be where daddies and daughters meet." Elijah took the drawing with trembling hands, his tears falling onto the colorful paper. "It's beautiful, sweetheart, just like you." In the back of the courtroom, Charles Palmer shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the exit. Something about this scene, about the raw truth of a father's love for his daughter, seemed to be affecting even his carefully maintained composure. Detective Graves couldn't tear his eyes away from the reunion. 8 years of drinking hadn't managed to drown the guilt of what he'd done, and now, watching this moment, he felt the weight of his betrayal more heavily than ever. "You look different than your pictures," Nia said softly, touching Elijah's hollow cheek. "But your eyes are the same. They're still kind." Elijah caught her small hand in his, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Being away from you made me sick, baby. But seeing you makes everything better." "Then I'll visit more," Nia declared with a child's simple logic. "Every day if they let me. I'll make you better, Daddy." The sound that escaped Elijah's throat was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He pulled her close again, knowing his time was running out, trying to memorize every detail of this moment. The feel of her in his arms, the sound of her voice without glass between them, the way she fit perfectly against his heart, as if she'd never been gone. Just then, a commotion erupted at the back of the courtroom. A man burst through the doors, his clothes disheveled, his eyes wild with urgency. "Stop!" he shouted. "I have proof! Elijah Carter is innocent!" The courtroom erupted in chaos. Judge Thompson banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! Order in this court!" Security officers moved toward the man, but he held his ground. "My name is Andre Lewis. I know who really set that fire. I know why Leon Palmer really died." Elijah instinctively pulled Nia closer, shielding her from the chaos. Monica rushed forward to collect their daughter, but Nia clung to her father, refusing to let go. Charles Palmer stood abruptly, his face ashen. Detective Graves's hand moved unconsciously to his service weapon, his eyes locked on Andre Lewis. "This is outrageous," Palmer's lawyer shouted, rising to his feet. "This man is clearly disturbed." "I was there," Andre's voice cut through the noise. "I saw everything. The real killer is in this room right now." Judge Thompson's gavel crashed down again. "Silence! Mr. Lewis, approach the bench immediately." Everyone else remained seated. Andre Lewis walked forward, his steps steady despite the tension in the room. He carried a worn leather satchel, clutching it like it contained something precious. "Your Honor," Jordan Hayes stood quickly. "Given this development, I move for—" "Mr. Hayes," the judge interrupted sharply. "This was meant to be a supervised visit, nothing more. However—" He paused, looking at Andre Lewis, then at Elijah still holding his daughter. "Given the nature of these allegations and Mr. Carter's condition, I will hear what Mr. Lewis has to say." In chambers, Charles Palmer's voice rang out. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "So is sending an innocent man to prison, Mr. Palmer," Andre shot back, his voice steady, despite the trembling in his hands. The judge's gavel came down one final time. "Enough, Mr. Lewis, my chambers. Mr. Hayes, Mr. Wilson, you'll join us. Officers, please escort Mr. Carter back to holding. Mrs. Carter, please take your daughter." "No!" Nia cried, clinging tighter to Elijah. "Please don't take my daddy away again." The sound of his daughter's distress shattered something in Elijah. He looked up at the judge, his voice barely a whisper but somehow filling the courtroom. "Please, Your Honor, just a few more minutes. In case this is all we get." Something in Elijah's voice, in the desperate love of a dying father, seemed to reach through Judge Thompson's formal exterior. He nodded slightly. 5 minutes, then we proceed as ordered." Elijah turned back to his daughter, wiping her tears, with gentle fingers. "Listen to me, baby girl. Whatever happens next, I need you to remember something. Can you do that for me?" Nia nodded, her small hands clutching his shirt. "Remember that your daddy loves you more than anything in this whole world. Remember that I think about you every single day, every single minute. And remember that no matter what anyone says, no matter what happens, you are the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you too, Daddy," Nia whispered, burying her face in his neck. "Please don't go away again. I'll always be with you, baby."
"Right here." He touched her heart gently. "And whenever you miss me, just look at the moon at night. I look at it too every night, thinking of you. So even when we're apart, we're still seeing the same thing, still connected." Monica approached.
Slowly, her own tears falling freely. "Come on, sweetheart. We need to let Daddy go with the officers now." Nia shook her head frantically. "No, Mommy. They can't take him. Not again. Elijah pressed a final kiss to his daughter's forehead, his tears falling into her hair. Be brave for me, baby girl. Remember what I said about the moon, and keep drawing those beautiful pictures. They keep me going, just like your love does. With a gentleness that broke everyone's hearts, Elijah carefully disentangled himself from Nia's grip, passing her to Monica. The moment he let go, his daughter's cry of distress cut through the courtroom like a physical pain. Daddy! Daddy! The officers moved forward to replace Elijah's restraints, but he barely felt them. All he could focus on was his daughter's face, trying to memorize every detail, knowing this might be the last time he saw her without glass between them. As they led him away, Nia's cries echoing in his ears, Elijah caught a glimpse of Andre Lewis heading toward the judge's chambers, clutching his satchel. In that moment, he allowed himself to feel something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Charles Palmer watched the proceedings with growing unease, his phone already in his hand, fingers flying over the keys as he typed out urgent messages. Detective. Graves sat frozen in his seat, his face a mask of conflicting emotions as he watched the scene unfold. The courtroom slowly emptied, reporters rushing out to file their stories, spectators discussing the dramatic turn of events in hushed voices. But Monica stayed seated, holding her sobbing daughter, both of them watching the door through which Elijah had disappeared. He's innocent, Mommy, Nia whispered through her tears. That man knows it. He's going to help Daddy come home. Monica stroked her daughter's hair, her own heart racing with cautious hope. Maybe, baby. Maybe this time the truth will finally come out. In the holding cell, Elijah sat with his head in his hands, his daughter's touch still lingering on his skin, her cries still echoing in his ears. But for the first time in 8 years, he felt something besides despair. Andre Lewis had appeared like an angel of truth, carrying what might be the key to his freedom. Please, he whispered to whatever power might be listening. Let me live, long enough to see my name cleared. Let me give my daughter back her father's good name, even if I can't give her back her father. The sound of his coughing echoed off the concrete walls, but this time, he fought against it with renewed strength. Somewhere above him, in the judge's chambers, a man was about to tell a story that could change everything. And in the courtroom, a little girl in a yellow dress sat with her mother, holding on to hope with the pure, unshakable faith of a child who knew, deep in her heart, that her daddy was a hero. The truth, so long buried under lies and corruption, was finally clawing its way to the surface, and not even Charles Palmer's money or Detective Graves's guilt could stop it now. The fluorescent lights in Jordan Hayes's office cast harsh shadows across Andre Lewis's face as he pulled documents from his worn leather satchel. His hands trembled, slightly, but his voice remained steady as he shared what he'd kept buried for 8 years. I was working security at Palmer Industries that night, Andre began, spreading photographs across Jordan's desk. Not official security, Charles Palmer hired guys like me to keep certain things off the books. Jordan leaned forward, studying the grainy photos. They showed loading docks, trucks moving in and out at odd hours, men in suits exchanging briefcases. What exactly were you securing? Andre's laugh was bitter. Everything dirty. Palmer used that warehouse for insurance fraud. They'd report full inventory, then empty the place out through back channels. Leon Palmer found out what his brother was doing. Leon Palmer, the firefighter who died in the blaze? Jordan's pen moved rapidly across his legal pad. Yeah, he was a good man, unlike his brother. Started asking questions about the warehouse, operations, said he had evidence of fraud. Andre's voice dropped. A week later, the place burns down and somehow Elijah Carter takes the fall. Outside Jordan's office window, the city lights twinkled innocently, masking the corruption that had destroyed an innocent man's life. Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising a storm. Why come forward now? Jordan asked, studying Andre's face. I saw that little girl on the news, watching her daddy waste away in prison. Andre's eyes grew distant. I got kids too. Couldn't live with it anymore. Across town, Charles Palmer paced his office, phone pressed to his ear. I don't care what. It costs. Find out everything about Andre Lewis. Family, friends, debts, anything we can use. His assistant's voice crackled through the speaker. Sir, he's been careful. Lived clean since getting out of his gang. But he has 3 kids in. Private school? Perfect. Palmer's smile was cold. Make the calls. Remind him how expensive good education is these days. Meanwhile, Officer James Bradley sat in his patrol car, parked in the shadows of a side street. At 28, he was still considered a rookie by department standards. But something about Elijah's case had caught his attention months ago. His dashboard computer displayed personnel files he shouldn't have access to. Detective Graves' bank records showed regular deposits from shell companies, all leading back to Palmer Industries. Bradley took another photo with his phone, adding it to his growing collection of evidence. A knock on his window made him jump. Another patrol officer, Kevin Murphy, peered in. Kinda late for paperwork, isn't it, Bradley? Just finishing reports, Bradley replied smoothly, casually closing the laptop. But he caught the way Murphy's eyes lingered on the screen, and something in the older officer's expression made his skin crawl. Hours later, Andre Lewis walked down a dimly lit street, his satchel clutched tightly. The sound of footsteps behind him made him walk faster, his heart pounding. He turned one corner, then another, trying to lose his pursuers. A black SUV pulled up alongside him. The window rolled down, revealing Charles Palmer's consigliere, Marcus Wheeler. Get in, Mr. Lewis. Let's discuss your children's educational future. Andre backed away, turning to run, but found his path blocked by 2 men in dark suits. I'm not interested in any discussion. Your kids are at St. Margaret's, right? Wheeler's voice was casual. Lovely school. Be a shame if their scholarships were suddenly revoked. Leave my children out of this. Andre's voice echoed off the brick walls. Then get in the car, and we'll make sure they stay in. Wheeler's smile never reached his eyes. Just then, flashing police lights illuminated the alley. Officer Bradley stepped out of his patrol car, hand resting deliberately on his weapon. Everything all right here, gentlemen? Wheeler's smile remained fixed. Just having a friendly chat with Mr. Lewis. Mind if I join the conversation? Bradley asked, positioning himself between Andre and the SUV. Wheeler assessed the situation, then nodded to his men. The SUV pulled away smoothly, leaving Bradley and Andre alone in the alley. Thank you, Andre breathed, his legs shaky with relief. Bradley nodded grimly. They'll be back. You should come with me. There's something you need to see. Across town, in the prison infirmary, Elijah sat propped up in bed, his breathing labored. The old medals Nia had mentioned sat in his lap, brought by Monica after their courtroom reunion. His fingers traced the engravings, remembering each rescue, each life saved. Your daughter found these, Monica had told him earlier that day. She polishes them every week, says they need to shine for when you come home. Now, alone in the darkness, Elijah fought against another coughing fit. The doctor had offered morphine for the pain, but he'd refused. He needed to stay clear-headed. Something was finally happening, and he had to hold on. In her bedroom, Nia sat at her small desk, drawing with fierce concentration. The page showed her father in his firefighter uniform, standing tall and strong, not like the thin man she'd hugged in court. Around him she drew other firefighters, all the ones who'd come to their house after his arrest, promising to help. Then slowly stopping their visits, Monica watched from the doorway, remembering those early days. How their firefighter family had slowly pulled away, not out of malice, but out of fear. The Palmer name carried weight in this city, and people had mortgages to pay, children to feed. Mom, Nia asked without looking up, if that man helps prove Daddy didn't do it, will he get better? Monica's heart clenched. How do you explain to a child that sometimes justice comes too late? I don't know, baby. But what matters is that people will know the truth about him. I already know the truth, Nia declared, adding another figure to her drawing. I'm putting Mr. Andre in the picture too. He's helping Daddy, so he's a hero like them. In his office, Jordan Hayes spread evidence across his walls. Photos, documents, timelines. Andre's testimony had given him threads to pull, and the whole tapestry of lies was beginning to unravel. His phone buzzed. A text from Officer Bradley. Need to meet. Have more evidence. Doesn't look good for Graves. Jordan typed back quickly. My office. 1 hour. Bring everything. Before Bradley could respond, another message came through, this one from an unknown number. Back off the Carter case or start planning your funeral. Jordan took a photo of the threat, then deleted the message. 8 years ago, threats like these had scared people into silence. Not this time. Officer Bradley's patrol car cut through the night, Andre Lewis in the passenger seat, a laptop balanced. On his knees. The screen showed surveillance footage, grainy but clear enough to see Detective Graves meeting with Charles Palmer the night before the warehouse fire. I've been collecting evidence for months, Bradley explained. Started after. I saw Elijah's daughter visiting him. Something about the way he was with her didn't match what his file said about him. Palmer's got people everywhere, Andre warned. Even in the department. Bradley nodded grimly. I know. That's why we're taking back roads to Hayes' office. Less chance of... Headlights suddenly flooded their car from behind. Bradley checked his rearview mirror, his grip tightening on the wheel. Hold on. The pursuing vehicle accelerated, ramming their back bumper. Bradley fought to maintain control as their car fishtailed on the wet road. Andre clutched the laptop, protecting their evidence as Bradley executed a precision turn down a side street. They're trying to run us off the road, Andre shouted, as another impact rocked their vehicle. Bradley's training kicked in. He cut through an alley, then another, finally losing their pursuers in a maze of side streets. When they finally pulled up to Jordan's office, both men were shaking. You okay? Bradley asked, checking Andre for injuries. Yeah. Andre hugged the laptop to his chest. Let's get inside before they find us again. Jordan buzzed them in, looking anxious. You're late. I was about to... He stopped, seeing their expressions. What happened? Palmer's people tried to stop us, Bradley explained, helping Andre set up the laptop. But they didn't get what we brought you. The three men hunched over the computer, watching years of corruption unfold in digital fragments. Graves meeting Palmer, money changing hands, documents being destroyed. This is enough to reopen the case, Jordan breathed. Maybe even enough for an immediate release given Elijah's condition. Palmer won't let that happen easily, Andre warned. He's already threatened my kids. Jordan's face hardened. Then we protect them. All of them. I know people. Former clients who owe me favors. U.S. Marshals, FBI agents. Give me an hour. While Jordan made calls, Bradley and Andre continued piecing together evidence. The picture they assembled was devastating. Systematic corruption reaching into every corner of city government, all protecting the Palmer family's criminal empire. Look at this. Bradley pointed to a document. The fire inspector who testified against Elijah. He bought a vacation home 3 months later, way above his pay grade. And here, Andre added, pulling up bank records. The judge's brother-in-law suddenly got a cushy job at Palmer Industries right after the conviction. Jordan returned, looking grimly satisfied. I've arranged protection for both your families. U.S. Marshals are moving them to safe locations now, and I've made copies of everything, stored in multiple secure locations. What about Elijah's family? Bradley asked. Already done. Monica and Nia are being moved tonight. I have people I trust watching them. As if on cue, Jordan's phone rang. Monica's number. They're here, she said without preamble. Men in suits, watching the house. Nia's scared. Get your go bag, Jordan instructed. My people are 3 minutes out. They'll take you somewhere safe. Jordan, Monica's voice cracked. What if all this is for nothing? What if we get the truth out? Too late for Elijah? Then we make sure his daughter grows up knowing her father was innocent, Jordan promised. But we're not giving up on him yet. After hanging up, Jordan turned to the others. We need to move fast. Palmer's getting desperate, which makes him dangerous. Bradley, get this evidence to the DA's office. Andre, you're coming with me to see Judge Thompson. It's time to force an emergency hearing. What about Graves? Andre asked. As if in answer, Bradley's police radio crackled to life. All units be advised. Detective Martin Graves was found unconscious in his home. Apparent suicide attempt. The three men exchanged looks. Palmer's tying up loose ends, Jordan said grimly. "We need to move. Now." In his prison cell, Elijah listened to the rain beating against the high window, unaware of the forces moving through the night on his behalf. His breath came in shallow gasps, each one a struggle. But he held on to consciousness, driven by something stronger than his failing body: hope. He pulled out Nia's latest drawing, the one she'd given him in court. In the soft glow of the prison lights, the colors seemed to glow. A father and daughter in a garden, together, free. Soon, he prayed. Please, let it be soon. Across the city, pieces were falling into place. Bradley's patrol car raced toward the DA's office, precious evidence secured beside him. Jordan and Andre navigated back streets toward Judge Thompson's home, ready to wake him with proof of corruption. And Monica held Nia close in the back of an unmarked car, trusting strangers to take them to safety while the truth fought its way into the light. Charles Palmer stood at his office window, watching lightning split the sky. His phone buzzed with updates, none of them good. Graves' suicide attempt. Andre Lewis slipping through his fingers. Evidence he thought long buried suddenly resurfacing. He poured himself a drink, hand steady despite everything crumbling around him. "Get me Wheeler," he barked into his intercom. "Tell him to use whatever resources necessary. This ends tonight." Dewey. Storm intensified, rain lashing against windows across the city. In his cell, Elijah closed his eyes, thinking of his daughter's smile. In the back of a safe car, Nia clutched her mother's hand, watching lightning illuminate the unfamiliar streets. In patrol cars and offices and judges' chambers, people moved through the night, carrying pieces of truth like precious cargo. The next 24 hours would change everything. The only question was whether Elijah Carter would live long enough to see justice done. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps where Nia sat alone, her small fingers tracing the edges of her latest drawing. The sketch showed her father as she remembered him from their embrace, thin and tired, but with eyes full of love. She'd spent hours getting those eyes just right, wanting to capture the way he'd looked at her when they finally held each other. "I'll fix everything, Daddy," she whispered to the paper, her voice barely audible above the city noise. "I promise." Inside the safe house where they'd spent the night, Monica watched her daughter through the window, her heart aching. The U.S. Marshals had brought them here after the threats began, but Nia had insisted on coming to the courthouse. "Daddy needs to know we're still fighting," she'd declared with that unwavering faith only children possess. The safe house felt alien. Generic furniture, bare walls, windows with blinds that stayed perpetually closed. But Nia had immediately claimed a corner of the living room, spreading out her art supplies, creating picture after picture of her father. Each one showed him a little stronger, a little healthier, as if she could draw him back to wellness through sheer force of will. Miles away, in the prison infirmary, Elijah fought through another coughing fit that left spots of red on his handkerchief. The medical staff exchanged worried glances as they checked his vitals. His blood pressure was dropping, his oxygen levels dangerously low. "Mr. Carter," Dr. Maxwell said gently, "you need to let us start the morphine. The pain you're experiencing—" "No," Elijah wheezed, his voice barely a whisper. "Need to stay clear. Need to see my baby girl free." Dr. Maxwell checked his chart again, her forehead creased with concern. "At this rate, you may not make it to your next court date. The cancer is advancing faster than we anticipated." Elijah turned his head toward the window, watching a bird soar past the bars. "Just need to hold on a little longer. My daughter believes in me. Can't let her down again." Jordan Hayes arrived at the prison shortly after noon, his briefcase bulging with new evidence. The guard at the infirmary desk took one look at Elijah's condition and almost turned him away. "He's not strong enough for visitors," the guard warned. "Please," Jordan insisted. "This could change everything." When he entered the room, Elijah was propped up on pillows, his skin nearly as white as the sheets. But his eyes were clear and focused as Jordan pulled up a chair. "Tell me," Elijah managed between careful breaths. Andre Lewis came forward with proof of the insurance fraud scheme. "Officer Bradley has been gathering evidence of corruption. We're close, Elijah. Really close. Elijah's hand trembled as he reached for the cup of water beside his bed. How's my girl? Safe. We moved them to a protected location. Nia's been drawing again. Monica says she won't stop until you're home. A ghost of a smile crossed Elijah's pale lips. She always was stubborn. Gets that from her mother. Meanwhile, Nia had discovered something in her mother's old storage boxes. Letters from Elijah that Monica had hidden away. She sat cross-legged on the safe house floor, carefully unfolding each one, her finger following the words as she read. My dearest Nia, one letter began. Today I watched another father walking with his daughter in the prison yard during family day. She was about your age, holding his hand, laughing at his jokes. I closed my eyes and imagined it was us. Imagined. Teaching you to ride a bike, helping with your homework, chasing away the monsters under your bed. Tears splashed onto the paper as Nia read. More letters spilled from the box. 8 years of love and longing captured in her father's careful handwriting. I dream of you every night, princess. In my dreams, I'm still a firefighter, still a hero. Still worthy of being your father. Sometimes I wake up reaching for you, forgetting where I am until reality crashes back. But then I remember. You believe in me. Your faith keeps me going when nothing else can. Monica found her daughter surrounded by letters, tears streaming down her face. Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. I was trying to protect you. He never stopped loving us, Nia said, looking up at her mother. Even when everyone else stopped believing in him, he never stopped loving us. Monica knelt beside her daughter, pulling her close. No, baby, he never did. Across town, Jordan worked frantically to prepare for an emergency hearing. He'd petitioned the court to review the new evidence, knowing every hour that passed put Elijah's life more at risk. His phone rang, Officer Bradley's number. Hayes, we've got trouble. Someone broke into the evidence room last night. Files are missing. Jordan's blood ran cold. The copies, safe. Like you said, multiple locations. But Palmer's getting desperate. Keep digging, Jordan instructed. We need everything you can find. And Bradley, watch your back. Detective Graves lay in his hospital bed, tubes snaking from his arms, a police guard at his door. The official report said attempted suicide, pills and whiskey, a common end. For cops who couldn't live with their guilt. But Graves knew the truth. Palmer's men had paid him a visit, made it clear that dead men tell no tales. He'd survived. Barely. Now, drifting in and out of consciousness, he saw Elijah's face, heard Nia's voice calling for her daddy in the courtroom. 8 years of guilt pressed down on him like a physical weight. With trembling fingers, he pressed the call button. When the nurse arrived, he managed to whisper, Need to make a statement. Need a lawyer. Back at the courthouse, Nia had opened her sketchbook again. This time she wasn't drawing her father as a firefighter or a hero. She drew him as she'd seen him in court, thin and sick, but with arms strong enough to hold her, with love enough to fill every empty space between them. A shadow fell across her paper. She looked up to find Sarah Palmer, Leon Palmer's widow, standing there, her expensive perfume cutting through the courthouse air. You're Elijah's little girl, Sarah said softly, her carefully made-up face showing signs of strain. I've been watching you draw. Nia clutched her sketchbook closer. My daddy's innocent. That man Andre knows the truth. Sarah Palmer's hands twisted her designer handbag. Yes, she whispered, so quietly Nia almost missed it. Yes, he does. Before Nia could respond, Sarah hurried away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. But she'd dropped something, a small USB drive that gleamed dully in the afternoon light. Nia picked it up, studying it carefully, before tucking it into her pocket. When Jordan arrived to check on her an hour later, she pressed it into his, hand without a word. Jordan plugged the drive into his laptop that evening, his office dark except for the blue glow of the screen. What he found made his hands shake. Security camera footage from the night of the fire, emails between Charles and Leon Palmer discussing the insurance fraud, proof that Sarah Palmer had been coerced into testifying falsely. That little girl, Sarah Palmer's voice shook in a video confession recorded that morning. She sits there drawing her father with such love, such faith. I can't let another child lose their father because of Palmer family lies. Leon would never have wanted this. In the prison infirmary, Elijah's condition deteriorated rapidly. His breathing became more labored, his periods of consciousness shorter. During one lucid moment, he grabbed Dr. Maxwell's hand. "Promise me," he gasped. "If I don't make it, tell my daughter I fought to stay. Tell her I never gave up." Dr. Maxwell blinked back tears. "Tell her yourself, Mr. Carter. Just hold on a little longer." But time was running out. Charles Palmer knew it too, watching the news coverage of Elijah's case with growing concern. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. Investors pulling out, politicians distancing themselves, journalists asking uncomfortable questions. "Sir," his assistant interrupted his dark thoughts. "Detective Graves is awake. He's asking for a lawyer." Palmer's fist crashed into his desk. "Take care of it. No loose ends." But it was too late. In his hospital room, Graves was already giving his statement to the district attorney, his words carrying the weight of truth and regret. "I helped frame an innocent man," he confessed, his voice weak but clear. "Charles Palmer orchestrated everything. The evidence tampering, the false testimony, all of it. Leon Palmer discovered his brother's insurance fraud scheme and threatened to expose it. Charles had him killed and pinned it on Carter. Back in the safe house, Nia worked on her most important drawing yet. This one wasn't just for her father. It was for the judge, the jury, anyone who needed to see the truth. She drew the warehouse fire, but not as it had been presented in court. She drew what Andre had described, men in suits moving boxes. In the night, her uncle Leon discovering the truth, the real culprits behind her father's nightmare. "Baby," Monica said softly, watching her daughter work. "What are you drawing?" "The truth, Mommy. So everyone can see it the way I do." Monica sat beside her daughter, studying the detailed scene. "When did you get so wise?" "Daddy's letters taught me. He always said the truth is like light. It finds its way through even the smallest cracks." Across the city, that truth was finally breaking free. Sarah Palmer's confession reached the media. Graves's statement sparked a federal investigation. Andre Lewis testified before a grand jury, his children safely tucked away in witness protection. But in the prison infirmary, Elijah Carter fought his hardest battle yet. His body was failing, the cancer spreading faster than anyone had predicted. The doctors worked frantically to stabilize him, knowing that freedom might finally be within reach. "Come on, man," Officer Sullivan urged from beside Elijah's bed. In 8 years of guarding him, he'd never seen an inmate with such dignity, such quiet strength. "Your little girl's waiting for you. Fight harder." Elijah's eyes fluttered open briefly. "Tell Nia," he wheezed. "Tell her I'm still fighting. Always fighting." Jordan Hayes raced through legal motions, calling in every favor he'd earned in 20 years of law practice. "We need an emergency hearing," he pleaded with Judge Thompson's clerk. "The man is dying while the truth sits in our hands." The judge, finally presented with irrefutable evidence of corruption, set an emergency hearing for the following morning. But as night fell over the city, no one was certain Elijah would live to see it. In the safe house, Nia refused to sleep. She sat by the window, clutching her father's letters, watching the moon rise over the city. Somewhere out there, her father was watching the same moon, just like he'd promised in court. "Please," she whispered to the night sky, "please let my daddy stay alive. Please let him come home." Monica watched her daughter's vigil, her own prayers echoing her child's. 8 years of separation had taught them both the cost of justice delayed. Now, with the truth finally emerging, they faced an even crueler possibility, that justice might come too late. But Nia Carter, 8 years old and unshakable in her faith, kept drawing. Her latest picture showed her father walking out of the prison gates, standing tall and strong again, reaching for her hand. "See, Mommy," she said, holding up the drawing. "This is how our story ends. Daddy comes home and we're a family again." Monica hugged her daughter close, feeling the fierce hope in that small body. "Yes, baby," she whispered into Nia's hair. "That's exactly how our story ends." Outside the safe house, U.S. Marshals kept their vigil, watching for Palmer's men. Inside, a little girl's faith illuminated the darkness, her drawings spreading across the floor like pages from a story still being written. And in his hospital bed, Elijah Carter fought to keep breathing. His daughter's love the only medicine, strong enough to keep his heart beating against impossible odds. Rain pounded against the windows of Jordan Hayes' office as his phone lit up with an unknown number. His finger hesitated over the screen before answering. Mr. Hayes. The voice was quiet, weathered by years of smoke and guilt. My name is Michael Richardson. I was a firefighter with Elijah Carter. There's something you need to see. Jordan grabbed his recorder. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Meet me at St. Michael's Church in an hour. I have Leon Palmer's personal journal. He knew about his brother's schemes, wrote everything down. The line went dead, leaving Jordan staring at his phone in the darkness. 8 years of searching for proof, and suddenly evidence was emerging from every shadow. He knew it could be a trap, but he couldn't ignore the possibility. He dialed Officer Bradley. I need backup, St. Michael's Church, 1 hour. Thunder rolled across the city as Jordan navigated the wet streets, wipers fighting against the downpour. His headlights caught glimpses of empty sidewalks, closed shops, a city holding its breath. The church loomed ahead, its Gothic spires reaching into the storm-dark sky. Jordan parked around back, noting Bradley's unmarked car already in position. The young officer nodded from his vantage point, hand resting near his weapon. Michael Richardson waited in the last pew, a leather-bound book clutched in his trembling hands. His firefighter's uniform was worn but clean, his badge polished to a shine that spoke of respect for what it represented. I should have come forward years ago, Richardson said as Jordan sat beside him. We all should have. But the Palmer name, he shook his head. You don't know what it's like, having that kind of power hovering over your family. I'm learning, Jordan replied quietly. Richardson handed over the journal. Leon started writing everything down when he first suspected something wasn't right at the warehouse. Chemical shipments that didn't match official inventory. Late-night meetings between Charles and known criminals. Insurance policies being doubled, tripled. Jordan opened the journal carefully. Leon Palmer's handwriting filled the pages. Neat, methodical observations of his brother's criminal empire. The final entry was dated the day before the fire. Confronted Charles today. He tried to buy my silence, offered me a share in the operation. When I refused, he reminded me how many people depend on Palmer money. Accidents happen in our line of work, he said, especially to firefighters who don't know their place. But I have to do what's right. Tomorrow I'm taking everything to the DA. Tomorrow never came for Leon Palmer. Instead, flames claimed his life, and an innocent man went to prison. Suddenly, headlights flooded the church windows. Richardson's face went pale. They followed me. God help us, they followed me. Jordan shoved the journal into his jacket. Back, door, now! They ran through the church as car doors slammed outside. Bradley's voice crackled over Jordan's phone. 3 vehicles, multiple armed men. Get out now. The first shots shattered the stained glass windows, sending colored shards raining down on the pews. Jordan and Richardson ducked behind a stone pillar as footsteps echoed through the sanctuary. Just give us the journal, Hayes. Marcus Wheeler's voice bounced off the vaulted ceiling. No one needs to die tonight. Bradley's voice came again, urgent. Police response is 3 minutes out. Keep moving. Jordan and Richardson crawled toward the vestry, staying low as more. Shots splintered the wooden pews. They reached the back door just as Wheeler's men breached the side entrance. Split up, Jordan whispered. They'll follow me. I have the journal. Get somewhere safe and call this number. He pressed a card into Richardson's hand. U.S. Marshals. They're protecting witnesses. Richardson grabbed Jordan's arm. Tell Elijah. Tell him we're sorry. We should have stood by him. More shots rang out. Closer now. The 2 men dove in opposite directions into the rain-soaked night. Jordan ran through back alleys, his shoes splashing through puddles, the journal pressed against his chest. Headlights swept past the alley mouth, Wheeler's men searching. His phone buzzed, Bradley confirming Richardson had made it to safety. But as Jordan turned the next corner, his car in sight, pain exploded in his left shoulder. The impact spun him around, sending him sprawling onto the wet pavement. The journal skidded away into the shadows. Wheeler emerged from the darkness, gun trained on Jordan's chest. 8 years we kept this buried. 8 years of perfect silence. Then you had to dig it all up for one dying convict. An innocent man, Jordan gasped, pressing his hand against the wound. Innocent? Wheeler laughed. In this city, no one's innocent, Hayes. We just decide who takes the fall. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Wheeler glanced toward the sound, then back at Jordan. Where's the journal? Gone, Jordan managed through gritted teeth. Already scanned and uploaded. Copies everywhere. Kill me if you want. The truth's already out there. Wheeler's finger tightened on the trigger just as police lights flooded the alley. Officer Bradley's voice rang out. Drop it. Hands where? I can see them. Wheeler turned, raising his weapon, but Bradley was faster. 2 shots echoed off the wet brick walls. Wheeler crumpled, his gun clattering away. Bus is 2 minutes out, Bradley said, keeping his weapon trained on Wheeler while checking Jordan's wound. You picked a hell of a night to play hero. Jordan managed a weak smile. Had to match the company I keep. Across town, in his penthouse office, Charles Palmer received the news of Wheeler's failure. His carefully constructed world was crumbling, and now Leon's journal had surfaced, the final nail in his coffin. He opened his wall safe, removing passport and bearer bonds. Time to disappear. But as he turned to leave, he found Detective Graves standing in his doorway, pale but upright, hospital ID still on his wrist. Going somewhere, Charles? Palmer's hand moved toward his desk drawer. Martin, shouldn't you be recovering from your accident? Funny thing about guilt, Graves said, his gun already drawn. Sometimes it's stronger than fear, even fear of you. How much? Excuse me? Palmer spread his hands. Money. Everyone has a price, Martin. Name yours. My price. Graves stepped into the office. How about 8 years of sleeping pills that don't work? 8 years of watching an innocent man rot in prison while his daughter grows up without him? How much is that worth? Be reasonable. I've already given my statement to the DA. Federal agents are on their way. It's over, Charles. Palmer lunged for his desk drawer, but Graves put 2 rounds into the wood beside his hand. Don't. For once in your life, face what you've done. When the FBI agents arrived minutes later, they found Charles Palmer sitting in his leather chair, hands folded, defeated. The great puppet master's strings had finally snapped. In the prison infirmary, Elijah Carter fought for each breath as Dr. Maxwell monitored his failing vital signs. The television mounted in the corner played breaking news. Businessman Charles Palmer arrested. Corruption scandal. Wrongful conviction evidence. Elijah's eyes flickered open. My girl. Need to see. Save your strength. Dr. Maxwell urged, adjusting his oxygen. Help is coming. At the safe house, Nia sat with her mother, watching the same news broadcast. Her small hands worked frantically at a new drawing, this one showing her father walking free, Charles Palmer in handcuffs. Is it really happening, Mom? Is Daddy really coming home? Monica pulled her daughter close, her own tears falling freely. Yes, baby, the truth is finally winning. Jordan Hayes, his shoulder bandaged, worked from his hospital bed, coordinating with the DA's office. Leon Palmer's journal had become the key that unlocked everything. Years of corruption, false testimony, manufactured evidence. Bradley brought him updates throughout the night. More witnesses coming forward, more evidence emerging. The wall of silence had cracked and now everyone was talking. Sarah Palmer gave a full confession, describing how Charles had forced her to lie about Elijah threatening Leon. The fire inspector admitted to falsifying reports. Even Judge Thompson's brother-in-law came forward about the bribe that bought his cushy Palmer Industries job. But time was running out. Elijah's condition deteriorated by the hour, his body struggling against the cancer that had spent 8 years growing unchecked. Jordan called an emergency meeting with the DA and federal prosecutors. "We can't wait for formal proceedings. This man is dying while we process paperwork." The DA nodded grimly. "I'm preparing an emergency motion to vacate the conviction, given the overwhelming evidence of corruption." "How long?" 24 hours minimum. "The judge has to—" "He doesn't have 24 hours. Jordan's fist hit the table, pulling at his injured shoulder. "Look at the medical reports. We need to move now." In the end, it was Nia who broke through the final barrier. She asked to speak at the emergency hearing, and something about the little girl's request moved even the most hardened court officials. The hearing was scheduled for dawn. Elijah was transported from the prison infirmary to the courthouse under medical supervision, his breath coming in shallow gasps. As the sun rose over the city, Nia Carter stood before Judge Thompson, her yellow dress bright against the dark wood of the courtroom. Her voice, clear and strong, carried to every corner of the room. "My daddy was a hero," she began, holding up her drawings. "He saved people from fires, but bad men started a different kind of fire, one made of lies. They burned up his life, but they couldn't burn up the truth." She walked closer to the judge's bench, showing him her pictures. "This is what really happened. The bad men hurt Uncle Leon because he was going to tell. Then they blame my daddy because he was good, and good people are easier to hurt." Tears streamed down Sarah Palmer's face as she watched from the gallery. Charles Palmer, in custody nearby, couldn't meet the child's eyes. "Please," Nia finished, her voice breaking slightly. "Please don't let my daddy die in prison. He's innocent and now everyone knows it. Please let him come home." Judge Thompson studied the drawings, then looked at the mountain of evidence before him. After 8 years of accepting Palmer bribes, of looking the other way, he finally did what he should have done at the original trial. In light of overwhelming evidence of wrongful conviction, this court vacates all charges against Elijah Carter. He is to be released immediately. The courtroom erupted in cheers and sobs. Nia ran to her father's wheelchair, climbing carefully into his lap as he was officially declared a free man. "We did it, Daddy," she whispered, feeling his tears fall into her hair. "We brought the truth into the light." Elijah's arms, weak but filled with love, wrapped around his daughter. "You never stopped believing in me, baby girl. You never stopped fighting." Monica joined them, completing their family circle as cameras flashed and reporters clamored for statements. But in that moment, nothing existed except a father holding his daughter, finally free to love her without bars or glass between them. Charles Palmer watched the scene with empty eyes as federal agents led him away. His empire of lies had crumbled, brought down not by federal investigations or witness testimony, but by a little girl's unwavering faith in her father's innocence. Detective Graves, still in his hospital gown, stood with Officer Bradley, watching justice finally prevail. 8 years too late, Graves muttered. "But not too late for what matters," Bradley replied, nodding toward Nia snuggled in her father's embrace. "Not too late for that." As morning light streamed through the courthouse windows, Elijah Carter held his family close, knowing his time might be short, but grateful for this moment of vindication. His daughter's drawings covered his lap, pictures of truth and justice, of love stronger than lies, of light finally breaking through 8 years of darkness. The truth had won, not just for Elijah, but for every person who had carried the weight of Palmer's corruption. The city would never be the same. But then, truth has a way of changing everything it touches. And in the end, it was a child's faith that lit the way, a little girl's drawings that mapped the path from injustice to redemption, proving that even the most carefully constructed lies cannot stand against the pure, unwavering light of truth. The morning of the final hearing arrived with a gentle sunrise that painted the courthouse in shades of gold. The building's marble steps, usually empty at this hour, were packed with reporters, activists, and members of the public drawn by a story that had captured the city's heart. Inside the courthouse, Elijah Carter sat in a wheelchair, oxygen tank, humming softly beside him. The prison jumpsuit was gone, replaced by a suit Jordan Hayes had brought him, his first real clothes in 8 years. Though the fabric hung loose on his gaunt frame, he sat as straight as his weakened body would allow. Every breath was a struggle, but Elijah refused the morphine Dr. Maxwell offered. "Need to be clear," he whispered. "Need to see this through." Monica and Nia waited in an anteroom, both dressed in their best clothes. Nia wore her yellow dress again, insisting it had brought them luck last time. She sat cross-legged on the floor, adding final touches to a new drawing. "What are you drawing now, baby?" Monica asked, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Our future," Nia replied without looking up. "After Daddy comes home." The courthouse filled quickly. In the gallery, firefighters began arriving, dozens of them, all in full dress uniform. Many were faces Elijah hadn't seen in 8 years, men and women who'd once been his brothers and sisters in service. Thomas Baker, the one who'd first voiced doubts about Elijah's guilt, led the group. They filed in silently, filling 3 full rows. Each wore a black band across their badge, a symbol of mourning for the years stolen from one of their own. Jordan Hayes arrived with Andre Lewis, both men looking exhausted but determined. The past few days had been a whirlwind of depositions and evidence processing. Andre's testimony had been the first crack in the wall, but what followed was an avalanche of truth. Detective Graves was wheeled in by Officer Bradley, still weak from his suicide attempt, but insistent on being present. The former detective's face was ashen, but his eyes were clear for the first time in 8 years. Charles Palmer was brought in wearing handcuffs, his expensive suit replaced by prison orange. His empire had crumbled overnight, banks freezing accounts, partners distancing themselves, politicians suddenly developing amnesia about their longtime friendship. Judge Thompson entered the courtroom, his face grave. The past week had forced him to confront his own role in this injustice. Every bribe he'd taken, every objection he'd wrongly sustained, every motion he'd denied, all of it had helped steal 8 years from an innocent man. The court will now hear final testimony in the matter of the state versus Elijah Carter, he announced, his voice carrying none of its usual authority. Given the extraordinary circumstances and new evidence, we will proceed differently today. The judge turned to where Detective Graves waited. "Detective, are you prepared to give your testimony?" Graves gripped the wheels of his chair, pushing himself forward despite his weakness. "I am, Your Honor." The courtroom fell silent as Graves began to speak. His voice, though shaky, grew stronger with each word of his confession. 8 years ago, I helped frame an innocent man. Charles Palmer ordered me to destroy evidence that would have proven Elijah Carter was nowhere near that warehouse when it burned. Security footage, witness statements, phone records, all of it gone. He turned to face Elijah directly. "I watched you with your daughter in that first trial, watched how you tried to be strong for her even as we buried you under lies. Every night since then, I've seen your face in my dreams, seen that baby girl crying for her daddy." Tears rolled down Graves' cheeks. "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. Nothing could be enough. But I'm telling the truth now. Finally, Elijah Carter is innocent. We all knew it then, and we know it now." Jordan stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Sarah Palmer to the stand." "Sarah." Palmer walked forward, her designer clothes and perfect makeup unable to hide her distress. After taking the oath, she smoothed her skirt with trembling hands. "Mrs. Palmer," Jordan began gently, "please tell the court about the night your husband died." Sarah's carefully constructed facade crumbled. Leon came home angry that night. He'd discovered files proving Charles was using the warehouse for insurance. Fraud. Said he couldn't stay quiet anymore, couldn't be part of the corruption. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. He called Charles, said he was going to the DA in the morning. 2 hours later, I got the call that there'd been a fire. Her voice broke. Charles came to see me before the police. Said if I didn't help frame Elijah Carter, I'd lose everything. My home, my status, my son's trust fund. Said accidents happen to widows who don't know their place. And the testimony you gave about Elijah threatening Leon? All lies. Elijah and Leon were friends. Leon trusted him, said Elijah was one of the few honest men left in the department. She turned to Elijah. I'm so sorry. My cowardice cost you everything. Next came Andre Lewis, clutching his documentation. He detailed the insurance fraud scheme, the late-night shipments, the falsified inventory reports. His testimony was followed by the fire inspector who admitted to falsifying evidence under Palmer's orders. One by one, the pillars of the false conviction crumbled. Jordan submitted Leon Palmer's journal, its pages telling the story of a man who died trying to expose his brother's crimes. The federal investigators presented their findings, a web of corruption that had ensnared judges, politicians, and police officials. Throughout it all, Elijah sat quietly, his breathing labored but his eyes clear. Nia had moved to sit beside him, her small hand clutching his, her presence giving him strength to endure. Finally, Jordan called his last witness. Your Honor, I'd like to call Nia Carter to the stand. The little girl squeezed her father's hand once more before walking to the witness box. At 8 years old, she barely reached the microphone, but her voice rang clear and strong. My daddy is not a bad man, she began, her eyes fixed on Judge Thompson. He's a hero who saved people from fires. While he was saving them, bad men hurt his friend and then told lies about my daddy. She held up her drawings, dozens of them, chronicling 8 years of separation, love, and unwavering faith. I drew these so people would see the truth. See my daddy the way I see him. Her voice wavered slightly. They took my daddy away when I was a baby. I never got to feel him hug me until last week, but even without hugs, he was always my hero. He wrote me letters telling me to be brave, to believe in the truth, and I did, and now everyone knows he was innocent. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even the court reporter had to pause to wipe her tears. Judge Thompson cleared his throat. Ms. Carter, how did you know your father was innocent when everyone else believed he was guilty? Nia's answer was immediate and pure. Because heroes don't do bad things. My daddy was a firefighter. He saved people. Saving people is the opposite of hurting them. And Daddy always told me in his letters that the truth is like light. It finds a way to shine through even the smallest cracks. She turned to where Charles Palmer sat. You tried to bury the truth under lots of lies. But lies are like darkness, and truth is like light. And light always wins against the dark. The wisdom of a child, untainted by cynicism or fear, fell like a judgment on everyone who had participated in the corruption. Judge Thompson sat quietly for a long moment after Nia returned to her father's side. Finally, he spoke. 8 years ago, I failed in my duty as a judge. I allowed money and influence to corrupt justice. I watched an innocent man go to prison while the guilty walked free. Today, I have a chance to right that wrong. He turned to face Elijah directly. Mr. Carter, this court finds that your conviction was obtained through corruption, false testimony, and fabricated evidence. In light of the overwhelming proof of your innocence, all charges against you are hereby vacated. The judge's gavel fell with a crack that echoed through the courtroom. You are a free man, Mr. Carter. The court offers its deepest apologies for the years stolen from you and your family. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. The firefighters stood as one, saluting their vindicated brother. Reporters rushed for the doors, eager to break the story. But at the center of it all, a family reunited. Nia threw herself into her father's arms as Monica knelt beside them, all three holding each other as 8 years of separation finally ended. I never stopped believing, Daddy, Nia whispered against his chest. You were my light, baby girl, Elijah replied, his voice thick with tears. You and your mama both. You kept me going when I wanted to give up. Charles Palmer was led away in handcuffs, his empire in ruins, his freedom forfeit. Detective Graves watched him go, then wheeled himself over to Elijah. Carter, he began, his voice breaking. I know I have no right to ask forgiveness. You told the truth in the end, Elijah interrupted quietly. That's what matters now. The firefighters approached next, led by Thomas Baker. We should have stood by you, Baker said, his voice heavy, with regret. We were cowards. Fear makes people do things they regret, Elijah replied, holding Nia closer. What matters is doing better now. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Jordan Hayes watched the scene with tired satisfaction. The truth had finally won. Justice had finally prevailed. But the cost had been devastating. 8 years of a man's life, a child growing up without her father, a family fractured by lies. Dr. Maxwell approached quietly, checking Elijah's oxygen levels. Her expression was worried, but she said nothing. Everyone knew this victory, though sweet might be brief. The cancer hadn't stopped advancing just because justice had finally arrived, but for now, in this moment, none of that mattered. A father held his daughter, while his wife embraced them both. A little girl's faith had helped expose corruption that had poisoned an entire city. Truth had finally found its way through the cracks, just as Elijah had taught his daughter it would. The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows, bathing the reunited family in warm light. Nia's drawings scattered around them told their story, a story of love stronger than lies, of faith outlasting corruption, of light ultimately defeating darkness. Outside, reporters clamored for statements and cameras flashed. The city would never be the same. The Palmer corruption scandal would lead to investigations, resignations, and reforms. But inside the courtroom, a father simply held his daughter, finally free to love her without bars or guilt between them. Ready to go home? Monica asked softly. Elijah looked at his wife and daughter, tears shining in his eyes. I've been ready for 8 years. Together they left the courtroom, not as a convicted man and his family, but as a father, mother, and daughter united in truth and vindication. The truth had finally won its long battle against lies, proving that even the most carefully constructed deception cannot stand against the pure, unwavering faith of a child who never stopped believing in her father's innocence. The morning after Elijah's release dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the windows of Monica's apartment. The space felt different now. No longer a home missing its heart, but a place where a family could finally heal together. Elijah sat in the living room, taking in the changes 8 years had brought. New furniture, different paint colors, but most striking were the walls covered in Nia's artwork. Hundreds of drawings chronicled his absence, each one a message of love and faith sent through prison walls. This is where I do my homework, Nia explained, giving him the grand tour from his wheelchair. And here's where I keep all my art supplies. Mom got me special pencils for Christmas. Her excitement at showing her father every detail of her life made his heart ache with joy and sadness. So many simple moments missed, so many milestones he'd only seen through letters and brief visits. Monica watched from the doorway, noting how Elijah's breath grew more labored with each passing hour. Dr. Maxwell had been clear. The cancer was aggressive, and freedom had come very late. But Monica kept her tears private, determined to make these last precious days count. Tell me about this one, Elijah asked, pointing to a drawing of a firefighter carrying someone from a burning building. That's from when you saved the Johnson twins, Nia said proudly. Mom told me the story, how you went back into the fire even though everyone said it was too dangerous. Elijah smiled, remembering. They were scared, hiding under their bed. Sometimes being brave means helping others find their courage. Like you did for me, Nia said, crawling carefully into his lap. You helped me be brave while you were away. He wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of her hair. No, baby girl. You helped me be brave. Your letters, your drawings, your faith in me. That's what kept me going. Throughout the day, visitors came to welcome Elijah home. Jordan Hayes stopped by with paperwork for a civil lawsuit against the city, but Elijah waved it away. I don't have time for more court battles, he said simply. I just want to be with my family. Thomas Baker and other firefighters arrived in the afternoon, bringing Elijah's old helmet, polished to a shine, his name still clearly visible. We kept it, Baker explained, his voice rough with emotion. Kept believing someday you'd want it back. Elijah ran his fingers over the familiar surface, remembering the weight of it on his head, the trust it represented. Thank you, he said softly, but this belongs to the next generation now. He turned to Nia. Would you like to keep it, baby girl? Her eyes widened as she accepted the helmet reverently. Really? But it's yours, Daddy. Now it's yours. A reminder that being brave means standing up for truth no matter how hard it gets. Officer Bradley visited briefly, bringing news that Charles Palmer had agreed to a plea deal, implicating dozens of corrupt officials. The city was in upheaval as the full scope of Palmer's corruption came to light. You started something big, Bradley told Elijah. Your case is going to help clean up this whole city. But Elijah's focus remained on his family. He spent hours listening to Nia read her favorite books, watching her draw, soaking in every detail of the daughter he'd missed growing up. Despite his increasing weakness, he fought to stay present for every moment. That evening, as the sun set, Monica found him looking through Nia's old drawings. She never missed a day, Monica said softly. Every single day she drew something for you. You did an amazing job with her, Elijah replied, taking his wife's hand. Kept her faith alive when everything was trying to kill it. Kept my memory alive when it would have been easier to let her forget. You were always alive in her heart, Monica said, tears finally falling in both our hearts. As night fell, Elijah's breathing became more difficult. Dr. Maxwell, making a house call, adjusted his oxygen and finally convinced him to accept some pain medication. You need to rest, she urged gently. But Elijah was afraid to sleep, afraid to miss a single moment with his family. He fought to keep his eyes open as Nia curled up next to him on the bed, showing him her latest drawing, the three of them together in a garden full of flowers. See, Daddy? This is our future, she explained, pointing to the details. We're having a picnic, and you're telling stories about being a firefighter, and everything is perfect. Elijah pulled her close, his heart breaking with the knowledge that this future would never come. It is perfect, baby girl, just like you. Late that night, after Nia had finally fallen asleep, Monica sat beside him in the darkness. I'm not ready, she whispered. We just got you back. Listen to me, he said, his voice weak but urgent. You have to be strong for her. Help her understand that this isn't goodbye. It's just a different way of being together. How can I explain that to her when I don't understand it myself? Tell her to keep drawing. Tell her that every picture she creates is a moment we share together. Tell her that love doesn't die, it just changes form. The next few days passed in a blur of precious moments. Elijah grew weaker, but his spirit remained strong. He recorded videos for Nia, messages of love and guidance for future birthdays, graduations, all the milestones he would miss. Remember, baby girl, he said into the camera, whenever you miss me, just look at the moon. I'll be looking too, so we'll be seeing the same thing, just like we talked about in our letters. Friends continued visiting, but Elijah's world had narrowed to the infinite space between himself and his daughter. He memorized every detail, the way her nose crinkled when she laughed, how her tongue stuck out slightly when she concentrated on drawing, the precise shade of brown in her eyes. One evening, Nia climbed into bed beside him, careful not to disturb his oxygen tubes. Daddy, she asked quietly, are you scared? Of what, baby? Of going to heaven? Of leaving us? Elijah gathered his strength to answer. I'm not scared of heaven, but I am sad about leaving you and your mom. That's different from being scared. Though, being sad about leaving people you love just means you loved them well. I'll miss you, she whispered, her small hand finding his. I'll miss you too, baby girl, but I'll always be watching over you. And you know what? What? Every time you're brave, every time you stand up for the truth like you did for me, I'll be right there with you, so proud I could burst. That night, as Nia slept peacefully beside him, Elijah felt a change coming. His breathing, already difficult, became more labored. Monica noticed immediately, her years of caring for him having attuned her to every shift in his condition. Should I call Dr. Maxwell? She asked, already reaching for the phone. No, he whispered. Just hold my other hand. Let me look at both my girls. Monica took his free hand, their fingers intertwining just as they had at their wedding at Nia's birth, at every important moment of their life together. Tears fell silently as she watched her husband memorize their daughter's sleeping face. "You were right," he breathed, his voice barely audible. "All those years, all those letters. You said the truth would come out. You never stopped believing." "Neither did you," Monica replied softly. Tell her I fought to stay as long as I could. Tell her these days with her were worth everything. Tell her." His voice trailed off as his eyes closed, his grip on their hands remaining strong even as his breathing slowed. Monica watched as peace settled over his features, the lines of pain and worry finally easing. When morning came, Nia woke to find her father gone, a slight smile still on his face. She didn't scream or cry. Instead, she got her sketchbook and began to draw, her father not as he'd been in his last days, but as she would always remember him, strong, brave, and radiating love. The city turned out in force for Elijah Carter's funeral. The fire department gave him full honors, his casket carried on a fire truck, firefighters in dress uniforms lining the streets, bagpipes playing Amazing Grace. Nia walked behind the casket, wearing her yellow dress, holding her mother's hand. She carried her father's helmet and a final drawing, one showing him in his firefighter gear, ascending a ladder that reached into the clouds. The investigation into Palmer's corruption continued, leading to dozens of arrests and reforms. But for Nia, justice had already been served. Her father had died a free man, vindicated in the eyes of the law and the city he had served. Years passed, and Nia grew into a young woman who carried her father's spirit of justice. She excelled in school, her artistic talent evolving into a powerful tool for storytelling. But it was her passion for justice that truly defined her path. On her first day of law school, Nia pinned her father's firefighter badge to her lapel. As she stood before her classroom, presenting her first case study, she pulled out a worn piece of paper, one of her childhood drawings. "This is why I want to be a lawyer," she explained. "Because 8 years ago, a little girl's drawings helped expose corruption and free an innocent man. That man was my father, and he taught me that truth is like light. It always finds a way through the darkness." Her first case as a lawyer involved another wrongfully convicted man. As she stood in the courtroom, she felt her father's presence, heard his voice in her memory. Sometimes being brave means helping others find their courage. The courtroom looked different from this side of the bar, but Nia's faith in justice remained as pure as it had been when she sat drawing pictures of her father's innocence. She carried that same determination into every case, becoming known as a fierce advocate for the wrongfully convicted. On her office wall hung her father's helmet, alongside her favorite childhood drawing, the one of them holding hands in a garden. Below it, she kept a quote from one of his letters. "The truth may be buried, but it never dies. It grows like a seed in darkness, always reaching for the light." Monica watched her daughter's success with pride and a touch of bittersweet joy. Elijah would have been so proud of the woman Nia had become. Sometimes, on clear nights, she would find Nia on the balcony, looking up at the moon, and know she was sharing another moment with her father. The city changed in the wake of the Palmer scandal. New oversight committees were formed, corrupt officials were removed, and the fire department established a scholarship in Elijah Carter's name for children of firefighters. But his most lasting legacy lived in his daughter. Nia Carter became a beacon of hope for families fighting wrongful convictions. Her childhood drawings, which had helped expose corruption, became a symbol of the power of unwavering faith in the face of injustice. Every time she won a case, every time she helped free an innocent person, Nia would look up at her father's helmet and whisper, "This one's for you, Daddy." And somewhere she knew he was watching, just as proud as he'd promised he would be, his love shining down like moonlight, guiding her path as she carried forward his legacy of courage, truth, and unwavering faith in justice. 10 years after Elijah's death, Nia stood before a group of law students sharing her story. My father taught me that being brave isn't about not being scared, she told them. It's about standing up for what's right, even when you're terrified. It's about believing in the truth, even when lies seem stronger. She held up one of her childhood drawings, faded now, but still powerful. This is how a little girl's faith helped expose corruption and free an innocent man. Never underestimate the power of truth, no matter how small its voice might seem. As she left the lecture hall, she paused to look up at the moon, full and bright in the evening sky. "Love you, Daddy," she whispered, touching the firefighter's badge she still wore every day. The wind brushed her cheek like a gentle caress, carrying the eternal truth her father had taught her, that love transcends prison walls, outlasts corruption, and shines like moonlight through the darkness of injustice, lighting the way for those brave enough to follow its path. What would you do to expose the truth? How far would you go to protect someone you love? If this story touched your heart, make sure to like and subscribe for more powerful tales of justice, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds between fathers and daughters. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on Nia's incredible journey, from a child with crayons to a force for justice. Remember, sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths.